All right. Thank you for bearing with me. This is Ben Frankel from Pegasystems, and welcome to the presentation on how Pegasystems has driven cloud adoption for mission-critical applications. And I'm the CTO of the cloud group at Pegasystems. And today we're going to talk about the path that Pega took to effectively sell cloud services for mission-critical applications to the world's largest organizations such as banks, insurance companies, healthcare firms, etc., our core business. And really, core to the premise of this whole session is this notion of a mission-critical application. And my definition of a mission-critical application is one that, were it to go down, will cause dire consequences for the company. And I think the easiest example to imagine is you've got a large financial services firm like a bank. JPMC is a good example. And they process credit card transactions. They have systems that allow them to do that. They have systems that allow them to handle checks. And they have large systems that house lots of secure and sensitive information like social security numbers and credit card numbers. And if any one of those systems goes down, that big bank is going to have some serious problems and possibly face sufficiently large legal problems that they may in fact go out of business. And so what really what I'm trying to get to is that this is the reason why mission-critical applications are the final frontier of the cloud and the last place where I think cloud will find and deeply penetrate into. Cloud is already well accepted in email, in the Salesforce automation and marketing automation world, and only very recently, over the last 5-6 years, have companies felt comfortable doing things like financial management, which NetSuite has been able to clearly capture a lot of value there. And this last domain is really around these mission-critical applications, and that's really the journey that Pegasystems had to go down, and that's because our bread and butter is mission-critical application-oriented business. And if you look at where our systems are being used, and even the very first system that Pegasystems sold back in 1983, we were handling check, debit, and credit card transactions. And around 80% of those in the United States go through a Pegasystem at some point. And we process trillions of dollars of payments a day through our systems. And if you have health insurance, you probably talk to someone occasionally when you file a claim, because we have 50% of the Blue Cross Blue Shield plans as our customers. And it's because of this focus on mission-critical applications that we had to, right out of the gates, figure out a way to get companies to get comfortable with the cloud very quickly. And we didn't have much low-hanging fruit because we don't sell an SFA app. We don't deliver email on the cloud. We only sell software that is used for solving very difficult problems. But to give you some more background on Pegasystems, we're a leader in the business process management space, and we are ranked #1 by Gartner and Forrester. And we've been around for a while, since 1983, and virtually that entire time, for the last 18 or so years, we've been profitable. And really, to give you a sense of what we do, I think the best way to describe it is, we're kind of like the third place in enterprise software. There are certain problems you can solve with build from scratch, and there are certain problems that off-the-shelf solutions can solve. And Pegasystems fills that void in the middle. If you can't go to build from scratch and you can't go to some company to get a packaged solution, you come to Pegasystems. And we're really the only company in the BPM space that has done this very well, and really with a focus on these mission-critical applications. To further provide some context, I wanted to give you a picture of how long the cloud business has been around at Pegasystems and how far we've come. And so the cloud group was created in 2009, at the very beginning of it, and I joined a couple months later. And really at that point, we started fleshing out our product definition and our marketing material, et cetera, and we very quickly landed an early adopter. But by late 2009, we had already discovered that there were some significant changes to our pitch, to the way we described our architecture and certain architectural elements that needed to be revamped. We identified a lot of opportunity for improvement, and a big chunk of what we're going to talk about today is what were the lessons learned from that early experience. And going from our first cloud customer in July all the way through to the end of 2010, we experienced massive growth, and really that growth started really taking off at the beginning of 2010, and we believe largely responsible for this change strategy and the differences in our approach to selling cloud. And 2010 over 2009, we had about 5x growth, and just looking at Q1 2011, I would say that our growth is going to be even better than that this year. So it has been a lot of lessons learned, but these lessons have been applied, and we have done quite well as a result. So I think it's funny, looking back in early 2009 on how we viewed cloud sales, the enterprise, it was a little bit different, and I struggled to come up with a good analogy for this, but the only, one of the things that came to mind was, when we first started out, we thought that cloud sales would be, these rocket-powered sales that were aided and abetted by gravity. So, definitely not going to be, you're not going to face a huge amount of resistance, and that was largely because we felt that the driving forces would be so overwhelmingly powerful. Time to market, setting up infrastructure at a large enterprise is pretty time-consuming and can be very expensive. The cloud basically makes all that time and provisioning and buying extra stuff go away, and it's a lot less money. Elasticity makes things easier to scale up along with demand, so you don't have to build for a peak, etc. And so we thought these two things would really get us all the way home, and it would be simple to convince companies, because of these benefits, to use the cloud for mission-critical applications. But what really kind of happened, and the way sales really works, and I think a better analogy may be an old guy pushing cloud uphill. And the reason why that is because the restraining forces were actually really powerful as well. And they largely hinged around concerns around security and integration. Security and integration concerns became the dominant theme in our conversations, and and still today, if there is a reason why companies not going to go to the cloud for production for mission critical app, it'll largely be because of these kinds of concerns. But we figured out a way to get around it, which I'll talk about. We also identified that not all the parties' interests at a prospect were necessarily aligned with ours. So there, in a very large organization, you might have people that want to fight and get funding for more data centers and more servers and more people to operate those data centers. And so their interests, we discovered, weren't necessarily aligned with going with a substantial cloud investment, because it appeared to them to take away from their power base. And there was some confusion. I mean, initially, the way we positioned our product, that we described and provided visibility into the entire stack of technologies we used, and we created some of this confusion ourselves as a result. And lastly, there was clearly a fear of the unknown. Large bank would say, we've never done anything on the cloud. We're not really interested in trying this out the very first time on a mission-critical application. And so there were all these restraining forces that kept us at bay. And really, the focus of the rest of 2009, after we discovered this, was figuring out how we could reduce the sales friction. And there were three primary ways that we did that, and I'll go into detail in each one of them, but here's a quick overview. The first thing is we dramatically simplified the pitch and took out all the extraneous elements and focused really on the needs of the business and what questions they had and what they were looking for. And that seems obvious, but it was very easy to fall in love with the technology early on. And secondly, we decided that we were going to address the security and integration concerns head-on and not leave that conversation to the end of the first presentation, but bring that forward. And lastly, we found a way to just get in the door to get these very large companies that will eventually use the cloud for mission-critical applications to do something in the cloud so they could get comfortable with it, they could experience the benefits, and we felt like that ended up being a very critical element in our strategy going forward. So I'm going to dig into how we simplify the story. So early on in January, we focused on how much better our technology was. We were incredibly proud of the technology decisions that we had made. And when we talked to a customer, we would describe in detail how elasticity would benefit them, how we could have support them across multiple data centers across the world because we were built on AWS. And we could support integrations with SOAP and EJBs and SQL, and we could support a VPN, and we could support other kinds of strategies for integration. And it became a acronym salad. And one of the important distinctions that I think we found was because we were such a technology-focused sale at the very beginning, that we didn't have a good separation between those portions of the stack that were really beneficial for Pega as a cloud service provider versus things that were primarily the benefits of the customer. I think elasticity is a really good example of that. When we initially talked to customers, we would say, look at this. We'd have these very exciting-looking graphs and say, here's what happens when you buy for peak and you have to upgrade your entire infrastructure every time there's a significant change in volume, and you can only do that so well and predict so well in advance. Whereas if you take advantage of the cloud, you can very closely match your demand. And that's a very common part of the cloud sales pitch. But we were selling software as a service solution effectively on a per user per month basis. And so even though the customer was very happy to know that we had a great way of doing that, we didn't need to concentrate on that piece of the story as much. And that's what we ended up finding. We ended up taking this acronym salad and condensing it to really just a couple of acronyms that were really important to the customer. And we boiled things down into SLAs and CYAs, service level agreements and cover your rear end elements. And that's what we focused on. So we tried to directly address what their business concerns were in the pitch, and it actually we completely changed the order in which we discuss things. So whereas before we may start off with the architecture, how great it is, we instead started off with our SLAs. We offer 99.95% uptime, and here is how we're able to do that. And then we explained how the technology fit into that. And we started talking more about the 24/7 customer support, which was a big value add that's separate from the technology. So bringing those other elements in to address the questions of if something goes wrong, who do I call? And well, we had an answer there, but these are the kinds of things that were the most important, and we moved those things to the top of the list. And lastly, there's the CYA stuff. And the CYA stuff is really involved with helping companies comply with the regulations that affect them. Banks have PCI, healthcare firms have HIPAA and high-tech, and they need assurances from us that we're doing our job properly. Like we have procedures in place for disaster recovery. We have procedures in place to enable people within our operations center to have access to information, that we do background checks on people. And so we've collected another series of acronyms, but are a little bit more business focused so that they feel comfortable and we help get through those initial hurdles that prevent us from getting a mission-critical deal put on the cloud. So, I think that transition between our strategy in early 2009 and what evolved through 2010 is what we principally attribute to our major growth. So the second piece of this is moving from a pitch that was mostly about the benefits to where we had about 50% of our slides spent on cost and time savings, and really flip that around a bit. So, initially we would spend 50% of the time on the benefits, 40% on how cool the technology was, and about 10% on security and integration concerns. And we really turned that around, and security and integration went from backup slides to about 50% of our presentations. And what this really did, what the big impact of this transition was, is that in the early mid-2009 timeframe, when we'd give a presentation about the cloud, and we'd get to the very end, we'd get a lot of Q&A on, how do you guys do this? How do you guys do that? How do you secure data in flight? How do you secure data at rest? How do I comply with PCI, DSS, etc.? And we wouldn't have enough time to finish up that meeting, and so we'd set up another series of security and integration conversations. And what we found is that if we shifted the percentages a bit and focused a lot more on and directly the security and integration concerns, we could shave meetings off of a sales cycle. And that's really powerful. And what we'd end up doing is we would add something like this that just appeared at the bottom of the screen here. We added a slide like this in there that allowed us to explain that our customers are largely banks, insurance companies, and healthcare firms with the needs that your business has, or have greater security and integration concerns than you. And it's we in order to have a usable cloud business for the company, a viable cloud business for the company, we needed to help our customers address PCI, DSS, and HIPAA. And if our customers were in the European Economic Area, we needed to help them address the EU data protection directives. And because that's what our customer base is, we have figured out a way to do this, and here is how. Here are the controls that we have in place. Here are the security controls. Here are the audit controls. Here are our backup and disaster recovery measures. And then from here, we would continue the story about how the technology decisions we made would allow us to do these things, give them the explanation. But the technology stuff was less important without the why. And the why really was, a lot of the decisions we made was about helping these big banks and insurance companies go to the cloud and use it for their mission-critical applications. And I think that was a very important lesson, shaved days and in the end really weeks off of sales cycles, and is significantly contributing to our growth rate in the cloud business. And in addition, and maybe the most important thing, is we figured out a way to just get in the door with the cloud in these large enterprises. And what I mean by that, we needed to find a way, we needed to find and package up a solution that a large company like a bank, insurance company, healthcare firm, we needed to find a use case where the cloud could be applied in a safe and friendly way. And this was really an important discovery, and it really changed the way we thought about what kinds of products we offered. And so we changed our product lineup to reflect the need to have something that addressed this need. And one of the first things we discovered, that there was a real need to differentiate between cloud-first customers and BPM-first customers. Now, what I mean by cloud-first is that cloud-first customer filters everything out first and foremost by cloud. So they know they want a cloud solution to solve a particular problem. Let's say they have a call center. They know that first and foremost, they want a cloud solution for it, and that within the world of cloud solutions, I'm going to look for I'm going to compare BPM on the cloud to CRMM on the cloud to whatever else is out there, maybe packaged applications that solve the same problem on the cloud. Versus the BPM first customer. The BPM first customer looks at the world through the lens of BPM first. I know I want a BPM solution, and now let's look in the world of BPM solutions, what's out there. There's going to be cloud solutions, on-premise solutions, etc. And the big difference is that a cloud-first customer is actually going to be a lot easier to sell, first of all, but there's no reason not to go for the home run in those early meetings. You know they're a cloud-first customer, and so you can say, hey, let's go and take this mission-critical app and put that on the cloud for production. And it's not controversial because they've already made a cloud decision, which means somebody else along the way has already sold them on the cloud, or they came from a place that use a cloud solution for a mission-critical application. And so that battle's already won, and then you're competing on the basis of our differentiation, both from a cloud perspective and a BPM perspective, but we don't have to fight the same kind of battle. Now, most of the time, though, particularly for mission-critical applications, we primarily talk to BPM first customers. And in that scenario, what we discovered is that if we went for the home run early on in those conversations, that we'd produce an antibody response, an autoimmune response, that prevented any cloud being used at all. And what it did is it introduced a lot of additional cycles to the evaluation of the technology and how it solved various problems. It needed to go through lots of internal review, and all that stuff needs to happen, but it was a precursor to doing anything on the cloud, and oftentimes because we sell a lot on a project-by-project basis, it would permanently put the cloud component of a deal at risk. And that was why we learned a second important principle, which is that we needed to be patient with the BPM first customers. And instead of saying, hey, let's go to production right out of the gates, we would say, Mr. Customer, let's put off that conversation about going to the cloud for production for now. You can certainly make that decision later, but let's focus on using the cloud for something that is less controversial internally for you, that we can get done more quickly, that can immediately start benefiting you, and is not mutually exclusive of going to the cloud for production. And that's when we made this discovery, we revitalized our product categories and defined a new product category called Pega Cloud for Development and Testing. And that was really powerful because now instead of triggering the autoimmune response, we could very carefully warm them up to the cloud over time, get them used to it, get them comfortable with it, let them experience the benefits of it. And as a result, we have closed a mammoth number of cloud deals, and we're seeing the fruits of that labor. Now as customers come to the point where they're about to go into production, many of them, we believe, will go to the cloud for production as well. And that's really important. It's sort of our equivalent of the try before you buy. In this case, you're doing development and testing on the cloud, and then we can, during that period of time, it's a 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 4 month, 6 month project, you can gradually warm them up for the production use case. But at least you get started right out of the gates, and cloud doesn't become a blocker for the overall deal. So we learned to be patient. And the last point here is that what we identified in Dev and Test was that it was really the smallest unit of functionality that delivered value. And I think that's critical for anybody who has a cloud business today who's selling into the large enterprise, and particularly who eventually want to have a customer put their mission-critical applications on the cloud. Find the smallest unit of functionality of your solution that delivers value on the cloud so that people can get a taste for it without having to bite off everything all at once and trigger that autoimmune response And I tell you, it's a lot easier to convince a customer who's successfully and painlessly and securely used the cloud for 6 months to go to the cloud for a mission-critical application than it is for a company who has never used the cloud before, and certainly never your cloud. So this was a lesson we learned the hard way, but nonetheless we learned. And hopefully we can impart this wisdom into all of your journeys to selling cloud to the enterprise. So in summary, we simplified the sales pitch, and I think if you religiously work to simplify your sales pitch, culling the elements that are not a high priority to the customer or not customer-centric benefits, you're going to do a lot better, and you're going to significantly reduce the friction involved with getting a cloud deal closed for a mission-critical app. And to address the security integration concerns head-on, now depending on your cloud product, it could be, the equivalent might not be security integration. There might be another bottleneck in your sale. But to address that head-on first and foremost, and I think for virtually anybody who's selling cloud services, I think this is probably the common thread and the most common barrier to adoption of the cloud is addressing these security and integration concerns head-on. And if you're just starting out building a cloud business, it's really easy to fall into the trap of trying to limit the amount of time you spend on talking about this. But the reality is that the enterprise is already there. They're already thinking about the security and integration concerns, and the benefits of time to market and time savings and possible FTE savings, etc. They already know those things. That's why they're having that conversation with you in the first place. And really, most of the time, you could spend the one slide on the benefits, which they immediately get because they're almost self-evident at this point, and focus the rest of the time on addressing the stickier issues around security and integration. And once we did that, as I stated earlier, we significantly cut down on the number of total meetings that we had to do with a customer. And lastly, you need to figure out a way to get in the door. Just getting your foot in the door is more important than anything else. And sometimes the counterintuitive thing is not going for the big deal can actually be the best chance of you getting that big mission critical app put on the cloud. And that was something that we learned at Pegasystems over the initial year of being in the business of selling cloud solutions, and that being patient component of it was vital to our success, and we were really happy with the way things turned out. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to any questions that you might have, and I think you can submit questions via the chat interface, and certainly any of you on the phone who have any follow-up questions post this session can email me at this email address, and I'd be happy to chat with you offline. But I'll look through this chat here to see some of these questions. And yes, so there's a question here about the presentation itself, and we will be able to share the presentation after this, and anybody who's an attendee for Cloud Slam will also get a copy of this presentation. And let's see. And we'll let some of the questions roll in. So we have a question, which is, are all of our conversations about the cloud typically with the CEO or CIOs, or is it with the IT guys? Well, for Pegasystems in general, we oftentimes start the conversation with the business, and what we've found is that the cloud sale is often initiated by the executives, by the business owners, rather than the IT guys. And so a lot of and I think that was a big part of the reason why we ended up reshuffling and reprioritizing our sales pitch to support the primary business concerns. Because you can imagine a business owner at a bank saying, hey, listen, I get it. I like BPM. I like your solution. Tell me about the cloud. And all I care about is, will I get sued if there's a data breach? Will it be up all the time because I can't afford for this thing to go down? And if I get, can I be PCI compliant with your solution? And what are your documented procedures? And so, they may not know all the details, but they know that they're going to be asked those questions in the end, and they need to have answers. And so we armed early those champions of the cloud. And another interesting trend we found over the course of 2009, and things changed a bit because the wave of enthusiasm for cloud gained enthusiasm over 2009. I think that cloud is a much easier conversation to have now than it was at the beginning of 2010, and that was in turn much easier than at the beginning of 2009. And as a result, what we're finding is that when a particular particular executive at a bank, an insurance company, or a healthcare firm, or a telco runs into a constraint within their own IT, we find that they're the ones that are suggesting to our Pega account executive, hey, can't we do this on the cloud? And so we have transitioned to a model where we oftentimes are selling to the C-level suite and the business owners rather than the IT guys. And we'll see what other questions come in. So while we're looking for those other questions, one of the interesting trends that we've seen is that there is amongst the mission critical applications that are out there, I would say that the one that is now on the edge of being a mainstream mission critical application, or a mainstream application of the cloud for a mission critical application, is in fact the call center. The call center is now getting easier and easier to sell as a cloud solution. And companies like Salesforce.com are having quite a bit of success in that area. And what we're finding is that we are, if it's a mission critical app, that it's oftentimes a call center solution that we're selling. And I think that is an interesting development that's happened over the course of 2009, 2010. In that we didn't see a lot of demand for cloud call center at first, and now that is one of the hot spots for us, and I think that's universally said to be true. So we have another question here. So we have a question on BPM on the cloud versus BPM on-premise, and what's my prediction on customer adoption to cloud, percentage of customers by the end of 2012, say. So my prediction is that and maybe a different way to describe it is that I believe that our customers, that Pegasystems customers, I think 50% of them will be using the cloud, the Pega cloud, somewhere in their organization. And that's not to say that they won't be using BPM on-premise, because they're not mutually exclusive, but I think we'll see around 50% of customers getting into the cloud game, and some of them will be instead of an on-premise solution, and I think in a lot of cases they'll be doing both. The hybrid model is is very popular, at least with our customers. And what we're seeing is that as I stated before, this is the smallest unit of functionality that delivers value. Devon Test solutions on the cloud demonstrate the value of the cloud, and I think through the end of 2012, I think 50% or more of our total customer base will be using cloud for either production or cloud for Devon Test. I have another question on what is the percent of time you're selling to the C-suite versus IT? So, I would say that about 75% of the time we're talking to the C-suite. That when, particularly in the deals where the business comes to us and says, can we do this on the cloud? Because we've had a cloud business since the beginning of 2009, but we've had customers for the last 20-odd years, more than that now, 28 years now. And so there are companies that come to us and say, hey, we're running into this bottleneck. We'd love to use the cloud in this case. And those ones are a mostly C-suite conversation. But you inevitably talk to IT at some point. There is no deal that we've done where we don't talk to IT at all. You have to have a conversation with them because they essentially have to provide a seal of approval. But we're finding that the conversations are being initiated by the C-suite and the business owners, and I wouldn't quite call it the C-suite because there's only a handful of people in the C-suite, but the business owners more generally, and I think that's kind of the intent of the question. The business owners are the ones that seem to have the most to gain from the use of the cloud. Because they have a time to market need, and the cloud allows them to get that, hit that market window, shave a couple of weeks off of deployment in new geography, and that's really powerful and compelling for them. All right. So by the nature of BPM case management, what kind of BPM projects are the starting point for the companies to adopt the cloud BPM? So what we're seeing is that for the Devon Test solutions that we have, that they cut across all the different use cases for BPM case management. And whether or not it's a bank or bank who's doing a Smart Investigate project, a credit card investigation, or a check exception management problem. We're finding that there's not all that much resistance to using the cloud for Devon Test in any of those cases. But when it comes to production use of the cloud, we're getting our greatest traction in the call center area, and I think it's getting to the point that companies very large number of companies are mostly evaluating cloud vendors for their call center, or I should say, they're more frequently evaluating cloud centers for their new call centers, and that, as I said before, that's a big change. So kind of a split, and I'll rephrase my response just to make it easier to understand. So there's a split for non-call center centric, non-customer service centric, mission-critical applications. We're seeing Devon Test having very even success across all those categories. For companies that are interested in going to the cloud for production right out of the gates, we're seeing the greatest traction in Cloud Call Center. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining this session on driving cloud adoption for mission-critical applications. And as I stated earlier, If you have any questions you'd like to ask me offline, please feel free to email me at benjamin.frankel@pega.com, and I hope this was informational and useful for you. And enjoy the rest of Cloud Slam.